Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for Next Gen Communication, how emerging HR professionals build confidence, credibility, and connection with Madeline Miller. We are recording the session, so if you need to catch up later or share it with colleagues, we will send out the link as soon as possible. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. It's so great to see some familiar names here. And for those I haven't met yet, just a quick intro. I'm Adela Fredrichova, recruitment at Fraser Jones Australia. We are a global HR recruitment and search business operating across the whole spectrum of HR. It has been an interesting 12 to 18 months in the HR and recruitment space. So if you are thinking of a move for yourself or hiring for your team and want to understand some of the trends or need a partner to help you recruit, please do get in touch. Also, a quick shout out to my amazing manager, Angela Franks, who is actually sitting across from me. Angela leads recruitment in the senior HR space. So if you are further along in your career, she's definitely someone to have on your radar. And now, the important part, why we are here. I wanted to run this session because I speak with early HR careers professional every single day, and I keep hearing the similar things. I feel stuck doing the admin work, but I want to be more strategic. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that yet. I feel like I'm too inexperienced to speak up or take the lead. I'm struggling dealing with senior stakeholders. And honestly, I get it. I feel the same sometimes. There's a lot of pressure to have it all figured out early on. But not a lot of support that speaks directly to where you are right now. So that's why exactly we wanted to create this space, something relatable and actually helpful, so you can walk away with practical tools and maybe a little confidence boost. So let me introduce you to our speaker today, Madeline Miller. We actually met a couple of months ago through a session we ran at Fraser Jones for HR leaders in law firms. And she spoke about engaging next generation talent, and it honestly just landed. It was clear, practical, real. And about Madeline, she brings over 15 years of global experience to her work as a leadership and career strategist. What I really like is how she just gets what early careers professionals are going through. And I also like how she challenges the outdated thinking in a way that's smart and respectful. That's exactly why I asked her to join me today. So thank you, Madeline, for being here. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm just looking at where everyone's coming from. Lots from Sydney, Perth, Melbourne. I've been in the US for 10 years. I've just moved back to Australia. I'm based in Melbourne, but I'm doing a lot of work all around Australia. So I'm really, really happy to have everyone here today. I'm going to jump in and get my slide going because we're going to share that. And then I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how we're going to approach the Okay, just check. I want to be able to toggle through the chat and my presentation. So I'm going to have to do that. Okay, everyone can see my slideshow. Just somebody put a yes in the chat just so I can check because I know you're all muted. Yes, okay, great. All right, so as Adela says, we are here today to talk specifically about how next generation HR professionals can build confidence, credibility, and connection. But I had a quick look at the guest list, and it looks like there's a real mix of levels today, which is really fantastic. And what I'm going to be doing in the next now 45 minutes or a bit more is going to take us through a micro version of the confidence, credibility, and connection training I do for teams using my AIR framework. And this training is really designed for any level, but particularly next gen leaders. So I'm going to try and get as much as I can in today so the framework can really come alive for you. The reason I teach this content is because I know that it is so common for all of us to have moments where we second guess how we show up and how we communicate. Today's session is really about trying to get beneath that self-doubt and really giving you some tools that you can use for your own self-leadership, because I'm really passionate about moving away from performative leadership and towards what I consider more authentic and integrated leadership. Okay. I just want to set the scene before I even go into like what we're going to cover and what you're going to need. I want to acknowledge that we are in a uniquely complex and new sort of workplace moment. We've got 4, sometimes 5 generations In the workplace, we have multiple communication styles. We definitely have a more diverse workforce than we've ever had before. And all of this is really adding to shifting expectations about how we view work. And these are all sort of colliding in real time. I know that for each and every one of us, it's not always the workplace we want, but it is the one that we're in. And Gen Z now make up over a third of the global workforce. And the research and definitely the work I've been doing with them over the last few years supports that they really value purpose, mental well-being, identity, safety, and growth over traditional things like hierarchy and titles. They have a lot of language around those needs, but not always the tools or clarity to put it in action or even to know what to ask for. And that is not bad, it's just new. So while systems take time to adjust, the fastest way for us to individually navigate this complexity is to really anchor into our own voice and value. And that's what today's session is about. Everybody is responsible for their own career story. And this type of self-leadership that I'm going to talk through doesn't just serve you, it can really help shape the culture around you. It can help shift power without needing to burn the whole system down. And it can help you individually get heard and respected without pretending to be somebody else. This session, I hope, is a practical but informed call to the type of leadership I see the future asking for, right? Which is much more human, grounded, and actionable. Now, what you're going to need today, as Adela briefly touched on, is a phone for scanning a QR code, because while I've never delivered this material to such a large group without an interactive element, I'm going to try and make it a little bit interactive so it's not just me talking at you. So there's going to be a couple of quizzes that I'm going to ask you to engage with, and you'll need to scan a QR code for that. Also, I'm going to drop in the chat, and I'm going to do that right now, a workbook that I've created just for this session. And the PDF, it's a PDF, but the fields should be editable. And there's going to be an exercise we're going to do together and a couple of prompts. And I want you to be able to use that workbook live as we go through that together. The third thing I ask is, because, as I said, it's not as interactive, we're not going to break into groups, we're not going to be talking to each other online. If you could just be as sort of open-minded and thoughtful as you could be. And if you feel like you've got something to say, or if I ask, if does anybody agree with that, pop it in the chat, because I guarantee that if you say something or if you engage, that's going to make other people who feel less confident than you more confident to also participate. I also want to just confirm that the polls we're doing are completely confidential. So whatever your answers are to that, no one's going to see who it is. It's just going to be aggregated into a number. So you can remain fairly anonymous. So let me put in the chat the workbook that I want us all to use. Today's session is not going to be your typical communication training. You're not going to get a list of correct phrases or scripts that are just going to help you sound more confident. What I'm sharing with you today comes from a model I call integrated development. And that means professional development or professional growth that actually sticks because it's personal. It works from the inside out. So integrated development, I believe, is the antidote to what's not working in traditional L&D. And I'm just going to explain that a little bit further in a moment. But the principle is this: we've been taught that leadership is about doing, but not about being. Integrated development is about reconnecting those two. It combines the inner clarity you need to achieve the external capabilities we measure. So at the end of this session, you will walk away with tools, but more importantly, I hope you'll leave with a clearer connection to who you are and the way you communicate and why that matters more than ever. This is a 60-minute micro intro to the AIR framework, and I use it across orgs, private clients, and in a signature 12-week coaching program I have. At the end of the session, I will share a little bit more with you about that, and if you want to take it a step further. Okay, very quickly, why I see traditional L&D not working. It's not that people aren't being developed by it, it's just that they're being developed in ways that I think these days disconnect them more from themselves. Traditional L&D focuses a lot on behavior, right? It teaches things like executive presence, communication skills, leadership behaviors, and none of this is inherently bad. But what it misses is the identity piece. How do I explain that? So the result I see in the work I do is surface level confidence and more performative pressure, because it often ignores things like power and identity, emotional regulation, self-leadership. It becomes a one-size-fits-all approach with valuable lessons and skills that just don't stick. And I've seen this in the conversations I have with organizations. I work a lot with law firms, and they provide training. They do a lot of mental health work now with their staff, but their associates say it's not working, which means there's a disconnect between what's being delivered and how. People are being trained to learn behaviors, but not to stay grounded where it matters. So integrated development changes that by starting with identity, and that's where AIR comes in. AIR is the system I use to deliver integrated development across teams, industries, and level. It helps people align with their purpose, values, and self-belief, then influence others through their communication, particularly when they're under pressure, and then master their energy so they can build better resilience without burning out. Today, as this sort of snapshot into AIR, I'm going to take you through an exercise I use to find alignment with people. Then we're going to look at how you can start to build genuine influence with others through your communication. And then finally, we're going to look at the types of resilience we all need when we are under pressure or spiraling. It's sped up, guys, but I think we're going to get there. And I really hope you're going to find something impactful. All right, this is the first poll I'd love you to all jump on. One of the things I'm most curious in is when you think about speaking up or being visible at work, which one of these do you feel the most? Is it, I want to get it right, I worry how I'll be perceived, I'm excited but nervous, I hesitate, then I regret it, or I'm pretty confident but it still takes effort? If you all scan that QR code and let me know in the chat if it doesn't work, you'll be able to answer the poll. And in 1 minute, I'm just going to have a quick look at what all the results were on screen. Now, for speaking up or being visible at work, which of these do you feel the most? I want to get it right. I worry how I'll be perceived. And then the others, I'm excited but no. Okay, so I want to get it right, and I worry how I perceive that. I mean, that all makes a lot of sense because, oh, sorry, toggling between screens is a bit messy. Okay, my presentation should be up now. That all makes a lot of sense that the biggest I guess fears or concerns, because we all know that communication is more than just words, right? It's much more around identity, risk, and perception, particularly in the workforce where we're really trying to shape this sort of professional image, and we're particularly attuned to how other people perceive us. So when we feel one of these fears, there's always a root cause, which is shaped by a number of things. It's shaped by culture, it's shaped by the systems, and it's shaped by our individual experiences. When you feel one of these things, when that's the sort of the knee-jerk response you have, it's you're trying to protect yourself, right? You're trying to protect yourself from old rules about what it means to be perfect, what it means to be professional, not to be too loud or too soft, not to make mistakes, don't ask for too much. But those rules were really built in a different time and often for a different type of leader. Behind all of those reactions are usually a root cause. So if and when we're and an inner critic. So when we're feeling those things, we're really saying like, what if I mess this up, right? And I see this all the time. And behind that fear of messing it up is often one or more of these very common root causes. So a lot of people have a fear of judgment. The core belief being, if I get it wrong, others will not think I'm, good enough, smart enough, or confident enough. And that really reflects that anxiety around how others perceive you. A lot of us have an internalized perfectionism, which is driven by a core belief that if it's not perfect, it's not good enough. That often leads to high pressure, avoidance of risk, and a reluctance to speak without complete certainty. Another voice or another inner critic we all have is that or a lot of us have, is that we can tie our self-worth to our performance. The core belief there is that your value depends on how well you perform. So then if you stop yourself from speaking, you're worried about messing up, because if you make an error, it feels like a reflection of your identity or your worth. Another one, which we're all probably quite familiar with, is imposter syndrome. There's a core belief there that I'm not really qualified and this will prove it. And this protection becomes a way to brace being sort of found out. And another very common root cause about underlying this fear of like, if I mess this up, is a lack of psychological safety. The core belief being, if I mess this up, it's not safe to recover. Now, psychological safety out of all of these is probably the one that's less individually driven. This is really common in cultures or teams where vulnerability isn't modeled, or where support isn't consistent, or it could even be a layover from previous environments. But no matter what the root cause, these are the core beliefs that we're holding on to that stop us from speaking up in that moment. So understanding that there's an initial reaction and then usually a core belief that's really driving that action, I want you to do one more quiz. Hopefully this QR code works. And I want us to think about, what if I mess it up had a voice, what would it be trying to protect you from? Would it be trying to protect you from a fear of being judged, damaging your reputation, letting others down, proving you're not good enough, failing publicly, or all of the above? Again, these are completely anonymous. I know this is quite deep to get into on a Tuesday lunchtime, but if you could just really take a moment to think, like, what are you trying to protect yourself from? And the reason I framed it as what if I mess up is that Adela shared a quiz before this workshop, I think, on LinkedIn, and asked, what is, when you feel self-doubt, what is the underlying message you're telling yourself? And the most common response was, what if I mess this up? And it sort of is aligned with the responses we saw you all share earlier. So take a moment, think about it. If what if I mess up had a voice, what would it be trying to protect you from? All of these answers stem from a concern with other people's opinions. And that makes sense, right? Because in the workplace, when we talk about confidence, we're talking about building influence with others. We're inherently concerned with what others think about us, because the workplace is all about the quality and the strength of our relationships with people, whether it's colleagues, managers, clients, stakeholders, whatever. But confidence actually comes from a Latin word meaning to trust. So we need to build trust in ourselves before we can gain trust from others. This means that confidence has to start with you, not what others think about you. And I see this tripping people up time and time again. When we think about building confidence and influence, we're very preoccupied on what other people think about us, and we don't actually start within. This is why building confidence is trickier and deeper than simply, teaching people to speak louder or saying certain or sounding certain, because that is about optics and about how other people perceive you. We really need to start with how we see ourselves. And this is the gap in traditional L&D. It teaches skills in isolation without unpacking the root that holds us back and then building that really solid foundation to grow. I mentioned the word influence a second ago. I said that confidence is about building influence with others. So as you might have noticed, I love looking into the origin of words. And last year I discovered that influence comes again from a Latin root meaning to flow in. So influence actually referred to a celestial fluid flowing in from the stars to affect the destiny of humans, which is incredibly powerful as an image. I like to think of it this way, and this is how I teach influence when I'm doing trainings. To have more influence is like being in flow. If you know anything about flow theory, it's when you're at your most natural, right? Your most authentic, and therefore having the most impact. There's a real ease to it. So I want to reframe confidence and influence in the workplace and make it more about what you think of yourself than what others think of you. It's all very well for me to say, like, stop your inner critic, learn how to communicate more confidently by saying this and this, but I know that it won't stick. It won't stick if it's not self-led. If your confidence and influence isn't an expression of you and your unique gifts, values, and power, it's because confidence is not an extension. It's because if your confidence is not an extension of your identity, it's fake, it's brittle. So the way I want to teach confidence, communication, and influence is to connect with your values and purpose first. Because when you are clear and believe in your words, your actions and behavior will start to change. And that's when new skills will stick. So we're going to start to affect lasting changes in your confidence, credibility, and connection by teaching you to communicate without that self-doubt taking over, by locking you in with your value and purpose. This is how we're going to replace that old model of confidence, which mirrors power, waits until it's perfect, stays polished, with a new one where we clarify values, we speak with intention, and we stay human. Now, I want to make a couple of comments on purpose. More and more research is done on the role purpose plays in career satisfaction. We're about to do an exercise on purpose, not because it's trending, but because it's really foundational. When you're clear on your purpose, even just a working version of it, you communicate differently, you feel grounded, and you recover faster from setbacks. You stop relying on external approval to validate your voice. McKinsey, Yale, research shows that a strong sense of purpose protects against burnout, reduces anxiety, and improves resilience. Stanford shows it's tied to better mental health and high satisfaction. Daniel Pink has work on motivation, and he shows that people don't just want autonomy and mastery, they want purpose. They want to feel like their work means something, and that starts not just with the job description, but clarity. So before we talk about communication skills, we start here, because confidence without purpose is just noise. Now, this is where I do want you all to access the workbook, because we're going to complete this mission and purpose statement in our workbook. So let me just see. All right. Good. Okay. So I want you to take a moment. I want you to think about 2 times in your life, and they do not have to be work related. It can be anything in your life. It can be personal, it can be school, it can be any activity. Some can be buying a house. One of my clients once talked about buying a house. But any time in your life where you felt engaged, alive, and successful. If you've got the workbook, you'll see that there is a prompt to fill this in. If not, just write it down. It's totally fine. The workbook was just making it pretty for you, but it's not going to change the impact of the exercise. So when you think about those 2 times, and as you do that, I want you to take note of a couple of things. I want you to think about what skills, gifts, or talents you used. Try and come down to like a couple of words. Obviously, there might be a lot, but try and pull out the 2 that maybe were common across both of those experiences. And then I want you to come up with a couple of things that you found the most fun or satisfying. So that might be, working with a group, or connecting with community, or using my problem solving skills, or feeling creative, whatever. And I really, really encourage you, even though I know it's the middle of your workday, to try and get out of your work head. I want you to think just about conceptually about your life here. So 2 times in your life you felt engaged, alive, and successful. What skills, gifts, or talents did you use? Like, what came naturally to you? What did you find the most fun or satisfying? And then the final thing I want you to think about is what results you achieved. Again, those results can be very broad. It could be creating a nice environment for people, or having a social impact, or making a difference to my community, whatever it is. I really don't mind. And this is very personal. Like, this is a massive group. We're not going to share these together. Normally in smaller groups, people have a bit of time to write these down, and then we come up and we share them and we speak them, and they feel really powerful. We don't have to do any of that participation in this session. Just write it down and start thinking about it. I'm going to give you like 3 or 4 minutes to think about it and just jot it down. Are there any questions? The clock is on. I'll give you 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I'm going to move on. Don't worry if you haven't finished. Like I said, this is an accelerated version, but you will have time to come back to this, because you are all going to have that worksheet. But what we're going to do next is we're going to take the answers that you've thought about for these questions, and we're going to turn it into a mission and purpose statement. So it's going to look like this. What you're going to write out is so you're prompted to ask, what 2 times in your life you felt engaged, alive, and successful, right? Then I wanted you to write down what skills, gifts, or talents did you use, what you found the most fun or satisfying, and what results did you achieve. Now we're going to turn this into a statement. And the way it's going to work is this. It's going to say, I feel I am of purpose when I am using my gifts of, and you're going to drop in the top skills, gifts, or talents you use, try and keep it to two things. Otherwise, it's going to get wordy. But sometimes we put three. So I feel I'm on purpose when I'm using my gifts of one or two things that are like naturally come easily to you. And then we're going to say while, and that's where you're going to insert the things that you found most satisfying or fulfilling. So you might say, I'm just making one up here, but I feel I'm on purpose when I'm using my gifts of communication and compassion, while the thing that you might, being with like-minded people and working in community with the intention to result in, and then you drop in the result you like. So for this hypothetical one, it might be with the result in to make a difference to people's lives. I encourage you actually here to be high level. You don't have to be super, super specific, because what this is really capturing for you is the essence of what motivates you. It's not what drives you at work. I'm trying to get you out of work. It's about what drives you as you, because I guarantee that there will be a through line between this and the work you do and how important it is you to feel a particular way at work. So whatever you write it in. After this session, just go back and read through it. I feel I am a purpose when I'm using my gifts of blah and blah, while blah, with the intention to result in blah. And as you read it out loud to yourself, it should really feel like it gets you. It should feel super authentic. And when it does, it should sort of feel energizing. That's what always happens, because people are suddenly like, yeah, that's who I am. That's what I do. And that's why, and we're going to start this basis now, because this is the basis of your power, right? This is the unique value that you bring and that continues through you in any work you do. All right, so I'm going to move on, but I encourage you all, if you didn't get a chance to finish this, to go back and do this after this session, because it's a really powerful way to remind you of the unique value you have. So I want to connect the dots. If the alignment gives you your inner clarity, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is a sense of value and your purpose. When you lock in on that, when you can really believe that, you give yourself permission to speak from that place, even when it feels more risky. It means that you can stop speaking to prove something and start speaking to contribute. Because how you sound is really shaped by what you believe about your value. If I want you to think about it this way, if purpose is the battery, then communication is the light. And when that battery is strong, the light is brighter, okay? So now I want to look at how your communication habits, especially when you're under pressure, reflect that internal sense of value and purpose, or I guess the absence of it. Now, this is a super complex slide that I'm going to break down for you, but this is like the crux of communication. Even when you are clear on your purpose, your communication can still get scrambled by doubt, power dynamics, or habits you've picked up to stay safe. And we looked at some of those earlier on. And when we're under pressure, we tend to default to one of three main communication styles. So that is aggressive, passive, or passive aggressive. Now, this communication matrix shows how they all have various levels of openness in communication and consideration of yourself and others. So let's take a look. So if you are, let's say if you are speaking aggressively, right? You actually have high openness of communication, which is a good thing, right? But in that moment, you have low consideration of others' needs, which is not a good thing. If you're passive, you have low openness of communication, and you also have high consideration of others because you're putting their needs before your own. If you're speaking in a passive aggressive way, you have low openness of communication. You're not saying what you feel, but you actually have low consideration of others. You're not actually putting their needs first either, because you're punishing them and not letting them know what they need to know. So all of these styles are learned, right? And they do always need some unpacking, and that's what we're going to spend the rest of the session doing. Assertive communication is obviously the gold standard of effective communication, but it's much harder to put into practice than we think, because assertive communication actually requires us to believe that our rights, needs, interests, and opinions are important, and that other people's rights, needs, interests, opinions are also important, and to communicate that in a clear and considerate way. As you can see, the other little label I put on here is that when you are being aggressive, you're being clear but inconsiderate. When you're being passive aggressive, you're being unclear and inconsiderate. When you're being passive, you're being unclear and inconsiderate. How this often comes across in how we show up in the workplace when we communicate is like this. And I put on a little animation. I hope it works. No, I did not. When you are when you default to aggressive communication and you're clear and inconsiderate, what you actually end up doing is either rambling or dominating a conversation, right? If you are a passive communicator, you tend to end up over explaining or shrinking. And if you're a passive aggressive communicator, you tend to end up avoiding or punishing. But what we really want to come across as is believing and resonating. And that is what the assertive communication quadrant is. So let's go a little bit further into this so we can actually put something into practice. I want you to think about a recent moment when you spoke up, or a recent moment where you wanted to speak up but didn't. Where do you think you sat in this quadrant? Were you clear but inconsiderate about other people's feelings and needs? Were you unclear and inconsiderate? You didn't really say what you felt and you kind of punished people in the process? Or were you unclear but considerate because you completely just were passive and didn't engage at all? Take a moment. There is a space in the workbook to write that in, but don't worry if you don't have the workbook. I just want you to think about it, because the reality is that we tend to default to one, but it's usually when we're under pressure. Sometimes we can all be assertive communications, but it's when the stakes are raised that we tend to default to one or the other. And I just want to have a moment of clarity here. So think about a recent moment where you spoke up or you wanted to. Where do you think you sat in that communication matrix quadrant? Okay. The reason we look at this quadrant is not because it's going to change your communication overnight. It's because it's going to build awareness. We will not always communicate perfectly, but from a place of awareness, we can start to ask ourselves the right questions to get back on track. So earlier, this is the animation that didn't come up before, but when you are being aggressive and you're being clear but inconsiderate of others, you will probably end up rambling or dominating. If you found that is if you noted that was something you did recently or something you have a tendency to do, we need to ask the right question in that moment to bring us back to self. Okay, so if that was the area you found yourself defaulting to, if you've noticed that coming up for you again, we need to ask ourselves, what is the one thing I want to say and why? If you found that you were falling into the passive aggressive corner of the quadrant, and you tended to avoid direct communication but indirectly punished people, I want you to ask yourself in that moment, and if that is a pattern for you, am I showing them my value? Similarly, if you found or you noted that you tended to be a little bit more passive when the stakes were high and you find that you over explain or you shrink yourself, I want you to ask yourself, what would this sound like if I trusted that they already respect me? And if you found that you actually were really pleased with yourself and that you did communicate from an assertive position where you believed in yourself and you resonated with what you were saying, I want you to ask yourself, what helped me speak clearly in that incident and how can I replicate that? These types of questions can really give you some clarity and insight, which is the first step needed to change behavior. This work, though, can be hard, right? Because despite your best effort when it comes to communicate, you can still freeze. Sometimes you overthink, you get defensive, you go silent, all of those things we just saw. And then often we can get stuck replaying a moment hours and hours and later. I want to reassure you that that is not failure or a deficiency. That is your nervous system doing its job. It's trying to protect you, and it's had a long time to do that. You default to one of those communication parts of the quadrant because that is how you've been conditioned to be. And your nervous system has started to feel safe there, even if we know that it's not the most productive way for you to be communicating and building credibility in the workplace. But this is where developing healthy emotional resilience can really kick in. To build resilience, we can notice the spiral, right? And we can make a micro choice to return to your presence, which is that beautiful position of power and value and purpose that we started to define earlier. You can do that by reminding yourself of your values, your purpose, and how you want to be seen by others. You don't have time for this today, but in your workbook, there is a prompt that you can complete to give you insight into what happens when you spiral or shut down in the workplace and how you can ground yourself to come back from it. This asks, am I spiraling and what am I starting to do? Observe the behavior. Am I shutting down? Am I avoiding? Am I attacking? Am I defending? Whatever it might be. What story am I starting to tell myself about what is happening to me now? And then what do I want to remind myself about my value and my purpose in this moment? And how do I want to show that to others? In the actual moment when you are panicking or getting emotional, you might suppress, you might attack, you might avoid. If you really need to catch yourself in that very moment, the two questions that I want you to ask yourself are, what do I know to be true right now? Because this can interrupt the panic. It can actually bring you back to your body. It can really give your voice something to stand on. Then I want you to ask yourself, what's the next right thing to say or do? I guarantee if you do that, that you are going to feel more calm and centered in the moment. And this is the type of thing we need to start practicing in the workplace, because the more we do this, the more it builds the muscle, the reflective skill to build this kind of resilience and impactful communication. I consider this exercise an exercise in recalibration. And you can do it again and again during your workday. And all of the prompts are in your workbook. Don't worry if you didn't jot it down. It's all there for you to work through. Whenever you feel overwhelmed, anxious, or that fear of what if I mess it up, you can return to your presence by asking yourself, what do I know? What do I know to be true right now? And what's the next right thing to say or do? So I call it recalibration because it's really a moment where you can pause and choose a different response. It's noticing the pattern, whether you freeze, react, over explain, or shut down, and interrupting it. And why do we want to do this? Like, why are we even here today talking about communication, credibility, and confidence in the workplace? Because we want to be free, right? We want to be free from these negative thoughts that keep us back, that fear around this sense of what if I mess up? We also want to be liberated. This is actually really powerful work because we also need to liberate ourselves from the social conditioning that's designed to keep certain voices quiet and others dominant. Because your voice matters, and to center it, you need to believe in it and also examine if you're using it in the most impactful way. We have all had those moments when we have left a room and thought, like, that wasn't me. And that is one of the most, I think, powerful things we can feel, like, that wasn't me. And liberation is really what can come after your communication stops being about protecting yourself and starts being about your presence. Because, as I explained earlier, when your voice isn't performing for somebody else, it actually starts to begin to contribute more. A lot of my younger clients like really struggle with this, and they beat themselves up a lot because they stop talking for fear of getting it wrong. But what this means is that they're not learning to master their energy and they're avoiding their growth. And a lot of the time, we really have to get messy in order to grow. I don't know if anyone here has read Brene Brown, but she talks a lot about this in terms of vulnerability. In order to use vulnerability, we have to get vulnerable, right? You got to enter the arena in order to grow. So I really truly encourage you not to shy away from using your voice or from pushing back or practicing when it feels awkward or comfortable. And to give an anecdote from my career, when I was a Hollywood entertainment lawyer for like almost 10 years. And there were many moments where I was not only the only woman in the room, but the only junior person in the room. And I was really intimidated a lot. But I had to learn to use my voice because there was no way I could get my job done with integrity otherwise, because I was there to mitigate risk, right? It was my job to be that checks and balances. So I really had to work on the underlying messages I was telling myself and work out where I was defaulting to and why, and the stories I was telling myself in order to be able to change the way I could communicate. And I started small. And that's what I want you all to do today, after today. I want you to really think about what could change if you trusted your voice more. if you can write down one area of your work where you want to lead with presence and where you can make a shift tomorrow, I want you to then think about what's held you back to date. So think about the story you're telling yourself and what you need to ask yourself in order to shift forward with more intention. And from there, I want you to set one action you can take to support that change. So think of one area in your week where you would like to lead with more presence. Think about the story you're telling yourself that's holding you back from doing that. And then think of one conversation this week that you're going to be able to that you want to approach differently. This is also in your workbook as a prompt. That is really all we've got time for because this is wrapping up, but I just wanted to show you what you've actually been practicing. It's not just a bunch of tools. It's a repeatable system that I teach in leadership programs called, as I said, the AIR framework. And this is how we've put it into action today. It helps you build the kind of influence that lasts because it's really rooted in who you are. So today you practice alignment by thinking about your mission and purpose. We clarified some of your values, and usually I would go deeper with that by doing a values exercise. And then we built self-belief as a foundation for confidence. From there, we looked at influence and how your influence is to how you build influence by starting to understand your communication defaults and starting to shift those with intention. And then we looked at how you build resilience by learning to recalibrate when you spiral or shut down when the stakes are high. And that is really the AIR lens: alignment, influence, and resilience. When these three are working together, your confidence becomes much more sustainable and your communication becomes much more powerful. And I say this because I've applied this with hundreds of people worldwide and I've seen it happen. And I believe that this is what real leadership looks like, right? It's not performative, it's really centered and ingrained. Everything we talked about today, purpose, clarity, presence, isn't about trying to be confident. It's about being clear, connected, and calm. It's about leading yourself before you try to lead anybody else. You don't have to prove yourself to have influence. You just need to be aligned with your voice, your values, and how you want to show up. Because when you lead from that place, that is when other people will really start to follow. And this is the heart of the work I do and the framework I've developed, because my goal is really for early career professionals to walk away from any session, even a short 60-minute session like this, with clearer language with how they work. And I work a lot with HR teams to bridge these gaps. If you are thinking this would be powerful for your grad program or your EIG, you don't even have to be the decision maker to start the conversation. You can reach out and share my details with your team, and I'll provide those after the chat. Now, unfortunately, because we are up against time, I don't think we have much time for Q&A. But before we go, I would love anybody to just drop in the chat, like, what's one word you took away from today? Presence, love it. What's another word? Confidence, 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 confidence. Okay. Finding my confidence. Okay. Confidence, clarity, influence, recalibration. Oh, good. I'm glad. Okay. This is great. Integrated development, appreciate those 2 words. That's okay, Ryan. I'll forgive you for that one because they're my words. Failure in a good way, self-reflection. Okay. And if anyone is willing to participate for the last leveraging off your natural talents, yeah. I mean, Clifton Strengths is great, Mina, but I really love a values exercise. It's a little bit more holistic. And if you're interested, I can share one with you. Authenticity, great. If anybody's keen, could they just drop in the chat if there was like one conversation or one thing they started to think about they could do differently this week, even if it's just the situation, like, is it a meeting? Is it talking to that coworker? Is it picking up the call for the client? Is there one thing somebody thought about that they want to approach differently this week? And if so, could they just drop that in the chat? Be assertive, not passive. Okay. Assertiveness is a practice. Okay. Suggesting my ideas. Okay. Awesome. Anyone else? Using that quadrant to think through how I respond. Yeah, that's great, Angela. Anybody else? Be assertive, not passive. I love. Client meeting. Okay. Oh, that was Adela. Thanks. Okay. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for all of, oh, here we go. Delivering feedback to leadership teams. That's a huge one. If you can effectively deliver feedback to leadership teams, I'm assuming you're not part of the leadership team, like that, if you can do that in an impactful way, which I truly believe you can, that is an enormous like learning curve. That is fantastic. I mean, that is a sign of true leadership. Finding how I can build credibility through my expertise. This can be altered through a change in how I communicate and how I communicate information. Request more defined role clarity from managers. That is so smart. That is so proactive. Again, we couldn't cover everything today, but one of the things I really encourage people to be, which you will be surprised at how much it doesn't happen in the workplace, is proactive. A lot of the problems we have at work are because people operate based on assumptions. They assume somebody feels a certain way. They assume someone's going to say no. They assume that something's clear when it's not. So if I can leave you with another little micro lesson, it's be proactive, never assume. Ask for clarification. So Kira, request more defined role clarity from your managers. Brilliant. That is going to give you more power because clarity gives power. All right, we are literally at the hour, so I think I'm going to stop there. But I just want to say thank you, everybody, so much for participating. I'm sorry there was some technical difficulties. Like I said, I haven't quite presented this material to such a big group with so many different hosts, but you will all get the worksheet. It is all there for you to really take a moment to reflect through. And I really hope you do, because all of this work, it's not just about skills, as I said, it's about reflection. It's about identity. And from there, the skills will start to stick more. So thank you so much all for joining.
Thank you from us as well. Thank you, Madeline, for a great session. I think we managed to cram so much into an hour, so really appreciate it.
So much.
And as Madeline mentioned, we will be sending the recording. I think it's going to be next week, so we will all receive it. And feel free to reach out to me or Madeline if you have any questions. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day whenever you may be.
Thanks, everyone.